evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Didris, the prominent professor at Proclamation News and Gatherings the Flow, live on Castbox FM and you Stocksy socially. Thank you all for coming through, supporting our channel time and time again. You can interact with me in the comment section, ladies and gents. You can also, if you want to, get your friends, family, share it. You know, we're trying to build a bigger, better establishment. Thank you ever so much for coming through. Thank you, Helia, Eleanor, Jose, and John all come through on Castbox. I think that's possibly Tony in YouTube in the comments. Before we always like to have a little before we get get things going. Anyway, it is Wednesday, the 24th of February, 2021. Proclamation News and Gavins is proudly sponsored by PSS Alarms. Very etiquette and pragmatic works carried out. All areas covered, including central station, monitoring provided. All work done according to insurance requirements. This is a friend of mine's company. He's carried out works in Harry Kane's stepmother's house in Hertfordshire, Potters Bar. He's also carried out etiquette works throughout Essex, such as Casabar restaurant, nightclubs, pubs, all different kinds of businesses. Please call Tariq Khan. His contact details are 07908 216 142. So call Tariq Khan on 07908 216 142. Please call Tariq Khan 07908 216 142. PSS Alarms. Installation and maintenance of intruder alarms, fire alarms, CCTV. All work guaranteed and certified to SSAIB standards. 24-hour call-out service. Can provide CCTV for pubs, clubs, restaurants, or new business setup. Secure your business. Mention Professor Johnson for an extra discount. Secure your home. Secure your business. Your safety and priorities within your business and your household are paramount. So think safety and think first. Secure your equity. Absolutely. I just want to give Mr. Tariq Khan a shout out for helping us sponsor our show. We're advertising for his business. He's a great guy. He deserves all the work. You know, he works hard. That's why he's got getting people to advertise his business. Absolutely. So here we go. Moving on, ladies and gents. Thank you all for tuning in this afternoon. Going to see what's going on in the. We're going to look at the roadmap. We're listening to the roadmap.
To make money with Amazon in 2021 is not by selling physical products on Amazon like everyone thinks. I'm not saying that doesn't work, but me and my twin brother Rasmus have found a way to use Amazon.
Feels like there's actually a plan. We can get back to some sort of normality. I'm relieved. Yeah. It's just like, oh, yeah, I'm so relieved and like happy, and we can get back to some sort of normality. It is hard to imagine. I think we've made so many adjustments, and it's almost hard to imagine what a new normal would look like.
I'm not really sure, so I wish that I really did. And it's been tough time for a lot of families. We do hear the accepting the sad news the family has to face, and it's something for us to work towards.
I'd say putting a fixed date on things is always going to be a bit ambitious. I think it's nice that we have a bit more stability with a plan. Like, it feels like there's actually a plan, rather than you wake up on one morning and, oh my god, you're suddenly in a different tier, or you suddenly can't go out. I think having a plan will prevent more panic, so keep everyone easy into it, sort of thing.
It got to a point where I sort of assumed that there would be no end in sight, so actually any date put forward is a bit of a surprise, I must admit. I think it sounds relatively hopeful.
Well, the bombs are going to
Oosh, they can't talk about.
I
I've been very lucky and fortunate to have had a business for a certain period of time that we can sustain this, but it's not the most ideal day. We definitely did think we would get to open sooner. How I thought of confirmed day is obviously a positive, but we will try everything we can to stay open.
Absolute phenomenal. Everyone is overwhelmed. They were getting back to some sort of normality, ladies and gents. We're getting back to some normality. Yeah, but that's people in London. That's people in London. So, you know, what we've got to look forward to in the next few months. Schools are opening up on the 8th. Restrictions are going to start coming in back to full normality by, was it June? I can't remember. I was listening. It was June, I believe. But anyway, stay tuned, guys. It's going to be a phenomenal show today. Getting all the latest inside proclamation news and governance journalism. Journalism at its finest hour. Looking at PMQ'S today. PMQ'S as is happens. Richard Morris, Sinead Wilson, Paul Seddon, and edited by Joanna Howitt. Got a slight issue going on here. What's going on there? Not quite wanted. Right, let's try again. We're going to pause on our coverage of the Commons for now. We're back here again next week for PMQ'S, and we'll bring you full coverage and analysis of the Chancellor's budget statement. Thanks for following us along with us today. We had quick reality check. How many are following self-isolation rules? At Prime Minister's questions, yeah, how many? I mean, let's have a little quick think. I mean, you know, we all admit our flaws, can't we? How many of us are sticking to the full isolation rules? I don't think I've had one slip up yet from the day start till now. I haven't been out of my constituency, home to my family's house. At Prime Minister's questions, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said around 3 in 10 people who should be self-isolating aren't doing so. On Monday, he repeated this claim but said the opposite, that only 3 in 10 people were self-isolating fully. This latter claim is supported by data released by the Scientific Advisory Group of Emergency SAGE, which advises the government on the pandemic. It said that just 29% of the people who had symptoms of coronavirus were full adhering to self-isolation rules. It described this as a suboptimal. It's difficult to get a precise figure on the account of people who do self-isolate because they are generally based on surveys. However, most of these surveys suggest the majority of people do not adhere to the full 10-day isolation period. The government has said that £500 payments are available to support those who might face financial difficulties by self-isolating. Again, there is no publicly available data on this, but Freedom of Information requests to local councils have shown that the majority of people who apply are rejected to the tough eligibility area. What happened at PMQ'S? Here's what happened at this week's PMQ'S. Sir Keir Starmer called for £500 self-isolation payments to be extended to everyone who needs it, adding that the poorest were at the bottom of the government's priorities. Boris Johnson rejected that, adding that more funding has been given to councils to make this a discretionary payments. After being challenged to the rule of tax rises and next week's budget, the Prime Minister said Labour councils were most likely to put up council tax from April. But Sir Keir replied, councils have been starved of funding, and the Conservative-run council in PM's own constituency is also planning a tax hike. The PM has also said that the government would continue to look after people after being urged to make temporary £20 a week universal credit benefits top-up permanent. Reality check at 12:45 PM today. Fast checking Johnson's claim about Europe and vaccines, speaking about the UK vaccination programme at the Prime Minister's questions. Boris Johnson made his claim about the Labour leader Keir Starmer. One week, he calls for us to go faster with rolling out the vaccines when he would have stayed in European Medicines Agency (EMA), which would have made the rollout impossible. We've covered this argument before, and it's a claim the Prime Minister has made repeatedly. It's clear that the UK has done a better job than countries in the EU in approving and distributing vaccines quickly. Our medicines regulator, the MHRA, has said the UK's early approval was permitted under the EU law. In the UK, had stayed part of the EMA, the EU's medicines regulator, there would have been political pressure to go with the majority on both the approval and distribution of vaccines. But that was equally true in the past about other big issues such as joining the euro or the passport-free Schengen area, and the UK joined neither. Stayed in the EMA might have made it harder for the UK to act alone, but it wouldn't have made it impossible. Wait for the budget, says the Prime Minister. Conservative MP Christian Wakeford has the final question and asks about the government's levelling up agenda. He welcomes the building of the new high school in Bury South constituency, but asks what more can be done to help town centres struggling as a result of COVID-19. The PM says the government is investing in his area through the local growth fund, the building fund and support for the transport network. Everyone will hear more next week, he says, when the Chancellor delivers his budget about how the government will build back better. SNP MP calls for universal credit top-up to be made permanent. SNP Stuart C. MacDonald calls on the Prime Minister to make permanent a £20 weekly increase to universal credit payments, currently due to end at the end of March. He says extending the top-up introduced last year as a temporary response to COVID-19 would bring basic dignity and avoid benefits dropping to their lowest real terms level in 30 years. Boris Johnson implies that the government will continue to look after people throughout the pandemic and beyond. He says the best way to do this is to bounce our economy back as quick as possible so that people have access to high quality jobs. Public pupils missing school due to flooding. Pupils missing school due to flooding. Proclamation news and gatherings with the prodigious Department Professor Johnson. It's Wednesday, the 24th of February, 2021. Thank you everyone for listening so far. 12:35 p.m. today. Pupils missing school due to flooding. The MP of West Lancashire, Rosie Copper, says everyone is looking forward to kids return to school, but in her constituency, students have had to wade through overflowing drains to get to the classroom. She asked if the Prime Minister will make sure no child in her constituency loses out due to problems with the flooding in the area. Mr Johnson says he sympathises and knows that flooding has caused disruption. He says the Environmental Agency is actively working with the council to see what more can be done. Is 43p per child enough to help students? Labour with Streeting says the education and well-being recovery of children is one of the biggest challenges for the pandemic. He asked if a raise of funding of 43p per student is enough to help with problems faced by young people. Mr Johnson says that before the pandemic, Funding was increased to state schools and government was doing massive investments in education. He says there's a cumulative extra 2 billion in spending from the UK government on paying teachers more and money for schools. Elizabeth Truss has a great input with schools and education and funding. Most definitely, I've been inside the Westminster committee meetings itself, so I know. Broadband support in rural areas. The Labour MP Neil Hudson, he raises the issue of the poor broadband in rural areas. He says he welcomes various schemes to improve the service that the government has backed, but what reassurance can a PM give people who are still struggling with connectivity? Johnson says ministers are doing what they can. He says there is £5 billion scheme to connect rural areas, and it is hoped that all issues will be sorted within the next 5 days. Lib Dem leader calls for Winter Olympics boycott over Uyghurs. Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey calls for the team Great Britain to boycott next year's Winter Olympics in Beijing over the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims in China's Xinjiang region. I'm not quite sure I'd say that country, to be honest. He calls this a genocide happening in front of our eyes. The Prime Minister says the UK is leading international action at the UN to hold China to account for its appalling campaign against Uyghurs. But he says it is the long-standing position of the government that are not normally in favour of sporting boycotts. Johnson and Blackford clash over independence. The SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford says next week's budget is an opportunity to tackle the financial cost of the pandemic. The UK has suffered its worst recession in 300 years, he warns. He says the Conservatives are threatening spending cuts, which will hurt working families. He asked for ruling out an austerity and for the major stimulus spending package in next week's budget. Mr Johnson said he's proud of the government spending throughout the pandemic. He says the Scottish government are not focusing on spending this money in the right areas. He says this is because the SNP are spending their time chasing a second referendum. Mr Blackford says that COVID-19 has exposed the deep inequalities in the UK, governed from Westminster. He says President Biden is investing a large package to help the country recover. Mr Johnson says the UK is investing $640 billion alone to infrastructure across the UK. He says all the SNP want to do is break up Britain with another referendum. Looking at the analysis at 12:23 by PM hoping vaccinations will inoculate the government criticism by the political correspondent Ian Watson. The Prime Minister come up with a new alternative attack line on Labour leader, how he facilitates we vaccinate. He'll be hoping the vaccination programme will inoculate him from criticism of his earlier handling of the pandemic. He also seemed to hint that there could be more money to help people self-isolate in the next week's budget. He was pushed by Sir Keir Starmer to give a £500 payment to all who needed it. Labour leader was keen to portray himself as a friend of business and families, opposing corporate and council tax rises at this stage. His attempt, though, to get the Prime Minister to denounce some of his own MPs for their avowed lockdown scepticism didn't quite come off. And there is a danger that Sir Keir Starmer sounds more supportive of the PM's plan than some Conservative MPs. Then this could further antagonise those in Labour ranks who want to see clearer blue or red water between government and opposition. Stop blaming others, says Starmer. Keir Starmer says 15 billion has been taken out of the council tax budget over the last 10 years, so the Prime Minister stop blaming others. He says this is another PMQ'S with no answers, but the budget is an opportunity to choose a different path. Boris Johnson implies that this government wants to do far more than Labour's poultry agenda. He says he is mystified at how the Labour leader weaves hither and yon with his opinions. He facilitates, we vaccinate, says Mr Johnson. Councils will have to put up council tax. Labour. Sir Keir Starmer says council are being forced to decide now if they should put up council tax to provide local services. He says councils are in the same position of needing to ask for higher tax rates, no matter what their political makeup is, because of a decade of underfunding local services. Mr Johnson says top 10 highest taxing councils in the UK are all run by the Labour Party and all apart from one putting up with their tax years. He says the London Mayor wants to increase tax by a further 10%, but when he is Mayor of London, he reduces taxes by 20%. Will tax go up? Sir Keir says you can get a 1 million contract if you have the health secretary's WhatsApp, but if you need to self-isolate, the government will not help. Labour leaders has asked for assurances families' tax will not go up. Mr Johnson says Labour would put up taxes. People aren't self-isolating, says Starmer. Sir Keir Starmer says 3 out of 10 people who should be self-isolating aren't doing so. He says for the chair of the NHS Test and Trace has warned that people can't afford to self-isolate, so therefore people are not taking tests. He says lower income areas are seeing stubborn high infection rates. Mr Johnson says there has been 280 billion package of support for people since the start of the pandemic, and people on the lowest incomes have been on the highest level of support. Starmer raises the COVID-19 disinformation. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the principles behind the cautious recovery plan plainly right. He warns that there are people falling victim to disinformation and saying COVID-19 is not as dangerous as feared. Boris Johnson says the roadmap set out by the government and the recovery is supported by the data for MPs to read. Help for councils. The first question comes from Derek Twigg, who says councils are running out of funding because the help offered by government is not enough. He says a properly funded scheme is needed so people can self-isolate if they test positive for COVID. Mr Johnson says it is very tough for councils, but the government has given an extra 4.3 billion. He says ministers will continue to support councils and the Chancellor will say more in his budget next week. This is what's going to be happening in the summer, what we were waiting for. So, just we can come straight through it now, guys. Thank you all for tuning in. Please subscribe. It means a lot. Everyone tuning in today, I really appreciate you guys coming through, supporting the show. Furhat and MRN. Summer catch up for schools planned for pupils in England. Secondary schools in England will be asked to consider delivering face-to-face schools as part of efforts to help councils catch up. An extra 400 million in funding has been announced, along with 300 million announced for catch-up projects in January. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the money will help ensure no child is left behind due to the pandemic. Teachers, experts and unions called the money a good start, but warned about overwhelming pupils and teachers. The Prime Minister has confirmed all pupils will return to classrooms from 8th of March as part of their first step of the roadmap for easing England's lockdown. With secondary school pupils being asked to take their COVID tests in school when they come back, it is likely that secondary school will have to stagger the return over a few days. National restrictions since last March have led many pupils to lose around half a year in face-to-face learning, the government said. As part of the latest announcement, schools will have an option to run summer classes for pupils who need it most, potentially starting with those who will be moving up to year 7 at secondary school this year. The government says it will be up to schools to decide how and if they run summer schools. how long they will be, and pupils will be invited to attend. Education Secretary Gavin Williamson said, "We're giving schools the option to be able to draw down on this funding." He said the average primary school will also receive £6,000 in extra money, with the average secondary school getting around £22,000 in extra recovery premium payments. I mean, it's a big shock for kids that now got to spend their summer term in school. It would help up to head teachers decide how we use the money. It could be used, for example, to pay teachers for overtime to do extra teaching. Last year, Mr Johnson announced a £1 billion catch-up for Fund of England, and later appointed Sir Kevin Collins as Education Recovery Commissioner. In Scotland, the administration had promised £140 million in funding to help disadvantaged pupils. Tens of millions of pounds have also been put into catch-up schemes in Wales and Northern Ireland. Review on masks. Mr Williamson also said the policy of secondary school pupils in England having to wear masks in classrooms would be reviewed over Easter. Most pupils will have to wear face coverings indoors, including in classroom where social distance isn't possible. We're reviewing at the Easter holidays to see if that has a positive effect, and the impact of public health in England would feel right, or whether it's going to continue to be necessary. He did not rule out the policy could remain in place until the 21st of June, which is the final date of the plans to ease the lockdown. The government's £700 million education support package for England includes a one-off £302 million recovery premium for state, primary and secondary schools to boost summer schooling clubs and activities. £200 million to fund face-to-face secondary summer schools, with teachers in charge of deciding which pupils benefit. An expanded national tutoring programme for primary and secondary pupils. An extended tuition fund for 16 to 19-year-olds, also worth £200 million. That includes £80 million funding to support early years language development. The government considered a variety of options for pupils, including extended schools and shorter summer holidays. But neither of those proposals form part of the plan set out on Wednesday. Asked whether extended to school day could be among future measures, Mr Williamson told Sky News, "We'll be looking at how we can boost and support children in a whole range of different manners. But it's not about time in school, it's about supporting teachers in terms of quality of teaching and how we can help them." You lot on YouTube, Facebook looking in, I'm on my YouTube, my camera's up there, so I'm not looking at my phone too much, but I'm trying. Alongside the noon announced programme, online resources will continue over the summer through Oak National Academy. Exams this year have already been cancelled in England, but Mr Williamson said more detail on how grades will be calculated in the next few days. Children have suffered traumatically through homeschooling. Children have suffered enough. Mother of three, Emily Olardi, says children are jaded by online learning and ready to go back to school, but she says it will be hard to get them motivated for school for more school over the summer. They are looking forward to summer holidays and having a proper break. She says ultimately children just want to go back to school and normal life. They're quite keen to go back. They're looking forward to seeing their friends. They want that normality. Father too, Nick Lee, says children and teachers need a proper summer break, not more schooling. My children have suffered enough with this pandemic and they will not attend any summer camps. We have all struggled to cope in these hard times, and stealing my children's summer is not the way to go. I'm making correct, no disrespect to the government's policy. I know we've got to go with the absolute sovereignty of the law, but it's unfair. Sarah Backer, who has two children and a stepchild, says she's torn over the idea of catch-up lessons in summer. They're all at really critical stages in their education, but they are also at critical stages in their personal development. So I'm completely torn. Yes, of course, they need to catch up, but they also need to regroup. And Sarah Webb, who has three children, age 11, 8 and 5, said children need time to recover from the past year rather than more academic pressure. These children have lived through a challenging year and as the best as they can. Many have learned new skills that are not recognised or celebrated at school, but just are important in growing up and developing one's character, helping at home, perseverance, self-motivation. These children have missed out on social interaction and how now need time to help readjust and come into terms with their experiences. Not been given more time and pressure to bring them back up to academic standards that can simply no longer apply to them. It's a shock for all kids, going, got to go summer school. Absolute meltdown for them kids, especially families that enjoy the summer holidays. Absolute meltdown for them kids. Not going to have a summer break. They're going back to further education. What a shame. What a shame for the kids. It is exactly what it says in the tin. You got to go by the rules, you get fined. That was horrible.
What can you tell us at this early stage about what we can expect? For instance, March the 8th, can you confirm all school children back in
Four tests that we will continue to monitor. One is that the rollout continues, so we can become more ambitious. We thought last time I was on your program talking about the name for all over 50s to be vaccinated by end of July. The second test is that the vaccine is reducing all those. 3 is then making sure that infection rates continue to be under control. So as we open up more of the economy, we don't see infection rates rising to a level that's unsustainable for the NHS. And then the fourth, which is equally important, is any variants that we then rapidly bring under control. Surge testing, genomic sequencing of the variants, and then...
Okay, all right. Can I ask, because we've just been discussing it with Jonathan Ashworth from the Labour Party. As we gradually open up, we expose many more people to people who may be carrying the virus, and apparently children are not vaccinated. But why didn't you use the half term to vaccinate teachers when they are going to be so exposed? And it is different from other venues which have remained open, because children are much harder to control when it comes to social distancing. For instance, when we've got so much capacity in the system, why haven't we vaccinated teachers?
So you're actually right to ask the question, because one, we work with teachers. Schools have been open for the front lines of children of NHS workers have been.
But managing a handful of children at a class, which is as brilliant as it is not the same as having 30 and hundreds of children milling around during the day.
You're absolutely right. But I was just really bringing it as an example that we've done 3 million tests in schools since January, so in preparation, if I can put it that way, for the reopening of schools, because it is our priority. Children have to be the priority. The reason for the tests I've just outlined, the 4 tests, and the third of those, which is to make sure we always look at infection rates not rising so rapidly by any decision that we make, so that it would make it unsustainable. That's a really important test. We're seeing the vaccine efficacy, looks like really positive. The Oxford team had some data where it reduced transmission by 2/3. The plans will be saying more on the data from public health.
Children are vaccinated, as we know, and therefore the teachers who are going to be standing up in front of those children are not protected.
You're absolutely right. So, number of parts of the answer, forgive me, I'm taking a bit too much time on the thirdly, making sure that teachers who are vulnerable, so a teacher who has any clinical condition or any underlying health condition is now being vaccinated. In cohort 6, which we are in the middle of right now as I'm speaking to you, and of course any teacher over the age of 50 is also in that cohort, because the Joint Committee on Vaccination Immunization looked at professionals, including the teaching profession, and very clearly said actually those who are in serious risk, serious infection, hospitalization and death are based on age, apart from cohort 6, which is 16-year-olds, 64-year-olds who may have an underlying health condition like diabetes or respiratory disease or heart, and they will be protected now.
Okay, Mr. Zoe, it was found a few days ago that Matt Hancock, the health secretary, had behaved unlawfully and breached his legal obligation by not publishing details within 30 days
of pandemic-related contracts being signed, described as a historic failure. When he was on the media airways yesterday, he refused to apologise for this, and in fact cited his brilliant performance, him and his team, in avoiding any national shortage of PPE. Let me first ask you about the law breaking. And that's completely unacceptable, isn't it, for a doctor to just act unlawfully?
The government obviously is challenged all the time through judicial review and other ways. I would just step back this for a second and just go back to the period when we were looking to make sure we deliver the PPE to the front line. The National Order Office said no health trust run out of PPE in the United Kingdom, and that is very.
Okay, well, let's come to that claim. Let's play first of all what Hank got to say about their shortage.
The situation was that we were very, very tight on PPE, and thankfully, thanks to the incredible work of my team, we didn't have a national shortage of PPE.
All right. Right, so my question to you is, your position now as a government is there was never a national shortage of PPE?
It was tight, it was difficult. We could only produce
Was there a national shortage?
nobody went, so the NHS, no health trust.
No, but let me just say, the health secretary stated as fact that there was never a national shortage of PPE. The reason he broke the law on revealing details of contracts that comes out at the moment, the reason he broke the law was because he was working so hard to avoid a national shortage of PPE. To which I say that is a shameful lie. There was a grotesque shortage of PPE. We had not planned for this properly. And in fact, we even had NHS staff, when they weren't seeing their colleagues dying on the front line in droves in the first wave due to lack of PPE, actually wearing bin liners because they didn't have PPE. The health secretary lied, didn't he, when he said there was no national.
Piers Morgan is every right to face his opinion. Absolutely, you know he's a great critic. Piers Morgan. He did have a thing the other day with, I don't know if it was the other day or a week or so ago, with Chris Eubank about his fight with Watson. You know, how did he feel about, you know, what he done, doing the damage he done. Obviously, Eubank, very, very subtle gentleman, nice kind of guy. He likes to think himself quite posh, partly have a Stocksy kind of guy. But he is, you know, he is a nice person. He was never malicious. Obviously, that accident happened in the ring with Watson. It's part of the sport, unfortunately. But it's, you know, it can happen in Formula One, motorbike racing. One flip of a car, or even bumping into someone else, you can kill the person in front of you. It's a risk you take within the sport. Piers Morgan, I felt he said a few uncomfortable questions, but you know, he's right to face his opinion all the time. So he's an honourable gentleman, and he has his right to express his opinion, because he's a critical thinker. That's why I like Piers Morgan. Anyway, I do like him, and some things I think, wow, I can't believe he's saying that, but there you go. Anyway, Harlow's 50 million plan, which would transform the town centre. Council is proposing a large-scale development within the town centre. A 50 million plan to transform an Essex town centre could go ahead this week. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted just how much retail and hospitality dominate our town and city centres, with many shops and hospitality venues closing at various stages over last year, as well as the already well-documented problems facing our high streets. Town centres are increasing shells of their former selves. Projects in Basden and Southend-on-Sea are already underway, are set to overhaul significant areas of the towns, bringing them into the modern age. Another town looking to change how their town centre looks is Harlow, Essex. Like Basden, Harlow is a new town built in the aftermath of the Second World War. Now members of the Harlow Council have proposed creating 50 million Harlow Investment Fund, which would help a number of key developments within the town centre. In the Cabinet meeting tomorrow, Thursday the 25th of February, the plan will be proposed and voted upon. It will involve a £5 million investment at the council, a property management development and regeneration company, with both invest 20 million each. Essex County Council would also invest 5 million. This would be put towards creating a series of residential and seafront with retail, hospitality and office spaces dotted around each large-scale residential development, highlighted through direct delivery and promotion of better designed, sustainable and higher quality homes served tenants of Harlow across Harlow. The final aim of the project will see 7 new villages built to the north of Harlow and a small amount of new villages out both east, west and south. It will also include stronger transport connection between these new areas and Harlow town centre. The report outlined tomorrow's decision from the council identified there may be a financial investment will be taking a commercial risk. While this is concerned as an investment proposal aiming to deliver regeneration of Harlow town centre, a priority growth location for Harlow by the grander scheme planned to approve or project the Harlow Investment Fund tomorrow in Harlow. Something to look forward to. Anyone in the Harlow region, or news of anyone in the Harlow region, you need to forward this information on. You can get the replay on YouTube, ladies and gentlemen, at Proclamation News and gather to you guys on Castbox. Criminology in Essex. No, in Hertfordshire, sorry. Alleged murder was vulnerable to manipulation defence claims in Cameron Hill case. The defence team of Chris that the jury should consider. At Cambridge, and also at the time of Cameron's death in June 2019. Seen at St Peter's Close in Hatfield after Cameron's death in June 2019. I was right there when it happened. The court also heard that a 38-year-old of St Peter's Close had physical issues of Miss Bishop, vulnerable to manipulation by Miss Bishop's flat, wanting to speak. He also claimed that Miss Bishop knew these men to be Jojo, a man identified by the prosecution as the drug gang leader, Sahala al-Hindi, who had fled the country, and Nicholas Pitts of Stockbridge. Miss Bishop did not tell the truth, as she was scared and frightened she would be blamed. David Jeremy, prosecuting Mr. Pitts, outlined the defence will demonstrate his client, who is now 40 and has a long-standing addiction to heroin and crack cocaine, was used by Mr. Hindi. He was dependent on al-Hindi for drugs, he said. He drove Mr. Hindi to Christie Bishop's flat, and he knew when he did that al-Hindi had a knife with him. But Jeremy claims that it was not unusual behaviour of Mr. al-Hindi and added that Mr. Pitts had a screwdriver for his own protection. But he did not take part in the attack or threaten him on his flat. Daniel Bentley, representing Arnold Masumbundi of Lime Farm Road, London, also charged with murder, said his client was a deal at the time, but when Mr. Masumbundi was 18, Mr. Bentley claims he was not there in the early hours of June 10th, and his defence adds the now 20-year-old was not one of the males that attacked and stabbed Cameron. And the court heard that Miss Masumbundi fingerprint, with which the prosecution claimed was found in the flat, was because he stayed there on the 5th of June when he was dealing drugs in the town. The court also heard that James Curtis, speaking for one of the other accused murderers of Najib Hassan, 24, of Queen Adelaide Court, London. The defence went over the prosecution case and said they would be changing evidence of an eyewitness, the significance of the pathologist's testimony and fingerprint. Meanwhile, the defence of Nickel Moore of Between Street, Cobham, Surrey, agreed the 25-year-old was there and has been chilling out with Mr. Hassan, alleged murders and futures Suba Ismaili, and Mr. al-Hindi. It is claimed by his defence team that Mr. Moore left before Cameron arrived, except he lied to police about being in Hatfield. But his defence claims that he was not involved in the murder of Cameron and did not know any attack was going to happen. The court also heard Mr. Moore was not there when Mr. Cameron was stabbed. Jason Gilzine, 53 of Champion Road, Hatfield, also denies 2 counts of assisting offender, but claims he knew Mr. Al Hindi, known to him as Sizzler, through his issue of drugs. A video of an interview with a female witness who is claimed to have when Cameron sustained stab wounds was also played to the court. The woman claims she was there as several men arrived at St. Peter's Close on June 10, 2019. The men the court heard were all black apart from Miss Pitts, who she recognised. She went on to say they asked her to call Mr. Cameron, but did not say she was threatened. Miss Bishop rang instead. The woman claims after the promise of drugs, and when the 23-year-old from North Mims arrived, the group allegedly attacked him. She claims to have heard Cameron say, "Stop it. Can we talk about it?" She had. One said he had enough now. The trial continues. I mean, what state of a mind, psychomotor state of a mind does it take allegedly to pick up a blade and kill? You know, what sort of provocation? I mean, over a drug deal, is it really worth taking someone's life over money, drugs, or anything? You know, I'm crying out for youth for today to not pick up weapons and fight. What happened to the old school way? You know, even fighting with your fist and that's not striking anyone. Full stop. I do strike anyone with a fist and with a weapon. Apologies for Ashley Court fire survivor asked to pay double council tax. Also in Hertfordshire, a survivor of Hatfield's sheltered housing block blaze was told to pay double council tax, but the decision has since been reversed. Since moving out of the temporary hotel after devastating fire near Wellfield Road, 79-year-old Jennifer has moved to be near Bedford, close to her family. But after alerting the council to the move, her daughter-in-law Karen was told by Welling Hatfield Borough Council that her mother-in-law was no longer entitled to a single-person council tax discount. Alongside this, Jennifer was asked to pay council tax on both Ashley Court while it is repaired, and on an elderly housing accommodation near Bedford. It seems to be mean, doesn't it? Karen told Welling Hatfield Times before the council reversed their decision. They don't need all this against. They used information. I used my information to write to her and to tell her she's lost a discount for a single person as she no longer lives in Ashley Court. Welling Hatfield Borough Council spokesperson said, after being alerted by Welling Hatfield Times, the fire damaged properties at Ashley Court are exempt from the council tax, and we apologise, Jennifer and her family, for causing undue concern. Should residents have further queries about their exemption, our team will be happy to help. On 01707 357 000. When Hatfield Borough Council has certain requirements for exemption, and typically empty properties require major repair work to render habitable or undergoing structural alteration, do not entitle residents to a reduction. A second home also pays a council tax if it is furnished property that is no one's sole or main residence. A total of 12 fire engines attended the blaze as a sheltered accommodation in December, which was thought to have started in laundry room. Investigations by the fire service are believed to be ongoing. Some residents have also been told to take 12 months before they are back at Ashley Court, as a roof needs to be repaired. Thank you all for coming in and supporting the show time and time again. Proclamation news and gatherings. It's with the prodigious, the prominent Professor Johnson at P&G. Flux with a flow, flux with a show, and away we go. Let's go. Reading and Leeds tweet raise musical festival fans for hopes. Reading and Leeds Festival organisers appear to have confirmed events will go ahead this summer after plans to ease lockdown were announced. Under government's plan, limits of social contact in England could be gone by the 21st June if COVID is under control. The Twin Site Festival is due to take place from 27th to 29th of August. Following the government's recent announcement, we can't wait to get back to the fields this summer, Reading and Leeds. Twitter feed said, let's go. A spokesperson said there is currently no further comment. Stormzy, Liam Gallagher, Queen of the Stone Age and have already been announced as headliners, with Mabel, AJ Tracy and Doja Cat also on the lineup. Suffolk's Latitude Festival, which is also run by Festival Republic, is expected to make an announcement about its plans for 2021 in the near future, the BBC has learned. The apparent confirmation comes a month at Glastonbury, which takes place early in the summer, was forced to cancel its 2021 event. I think all these kind of events should be shut off for safety measures anyway, just to make sure. What's going to hurt for one more year, standby. Last year, Reading Leeds, boss Melvin Bett told MPs his events could not go ahead while social distancing was in place. However, he said live music could resume with mass testing of hands, creating an environment where nobody in the space has tested negative in order to gain entry and therefore unable to transmit the virus to other people. It is unclear whether any measures will be put in place for this summer's event. Reading and Leeds is regarded by many fans as second only to Glastonbury in the annual UK calendar, originally a rock festival. Has seen legendary performances of Nirvana, Oasis, Guns N' Roses and Paramore. More recently, it has embraced dance and hip-hop with profile slots for Prodigy, Kendrick Lamar and Post Malone. This year, the festival is due to host 2,000 fans at Richfield Avenue in Reading, Bramham Park in Leeds, with two main stages at each site. It is not clear how Reading and Leeds has been able to finalise its plans less than 48 hours after Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced his four-step plan for easing restrictions. Under the proposal, outdoor hospitality, including drive-in cinemas, could reopen as part of the Step 2 in April. Pilots of indoor live events with social distancing could also commence at the same time. Step 3, which could start no earlier than 17 May, could be limited indoor mixing. Indoor concerts would have a limit of 1,000 people, or 50% of a venue's maximum capacity. Outdoor concerts and sporting events would have an upper limit of 4,000 people, or 10,000 for seated events. The roadmap gives no guarantee for these dates, with every step dependent on slowing the spread of COVID-19. Nonetheless, music industry welcomed the timeline for the lifting of lockdown restrictions in England. However, it warned that live music was at the back of the queue to reopen and may need financial assistance. Greg Palmley, chief executive of the trade body Live, said his sector could be months behind the rest of the economy. The Chancellor must acknowledge that extending closure in the budget and provide the economic support needed to ensure the jobs and livelihoods of the hundreds of thousands of people that work in our industry exist as we come through the pandemic, he said. The UK live music industry was effectively wiped out by the COVID-19 pandemic, with events cancelled throughout 2020 and many major tours postponed until autumn at the earliest. The situation prompted the House of Commons Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee to launch an inquiry into the future of festivals. Last month, the committee wrote a Chancellor Rishi Sunak to ask him to extend government-backed insurance schemes to music and performing arts festivals. Again, over on Proclamation News and Gatherings, Ipswich lockdown litter artists aims to inspire UK clean-up. Giant garden moles made from rubbish, disregard PPE, viewed thousands of times on social media, is a start of creating communities that don't drop litter and artist hopes. Jason Alexander, 49, from Ipswich, has spent creating art out of thousands of pieces of discarded items. In an ideal world, I'd much rather be creating a piece of art out of natural materials, he said. But wherever you go for a walk, you'll never be more than a few feet away of pieces of litter that have been dropped by someone. PPE litter has been a real issue during the pandemic. Mr. Alexander said he hoped his artwork was a way to not build a community of litter pickers and build communities that don't drop litter. In Essex again, ladies and gents, proclamation news and gatherings. Please share. A man arrested stabbed on busy high street in Essex. A 14-year-old has been stabbed for an incident in Southminster High Street. A man has been arrested after a teenager was stabbed in Southminster. Essex police has arrested a man on suspicion of grievous bodily harm for an incident that afternoon, February 23, on Southminster. Confirmed that a fourth stabbed. He has been taken to hospital where he is receiving treatment. The man has been arrested for grievously bodily harm, and police are now asking anyone who witnessed the incident to come forward to assist them with a call 30 p.m. today, 23rd of February, to an incident on High Street, Southminster. A 14-year-old sustained a stab wound to his hand. He's been taken to hospital for treatment. A man has been arrested on suspicion of GBH and is in police custody. Police remain at the scene. Anyone who saw a police is asked to call us on 101 and instant number 77 on 23rd of February. Also, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you give the information over to the police. Proclamation news and gatherings. Absolute populism. Thank you all for supporting the show day in, day out. I want to build a bigger, better establishment, get more people on board, supporting the show. You know, influencing people to stop carrying weapons. Youthful today. Influencing people to stop entering vehicles under the influence of alcohol and narcotics. I just want to say thank you all for coming through on the show. Take care. One love. Speak soon. God bless.